Well, one of the challenges we face because of the Conservatives crashed the economy and the situation we're going to inherit is that we won't be able to reverse everything that the Conservatives have done over the last 13 years. The house building that I'm proposing at the start of conference that we'll be announcing more this week is about actually giving people secure futures and making sure that we can tackle things like child poverty. But we've had 13 years of Conservative failure, a crashed economy, so we're going to inherit a very difficult programme if we were lucky enough to win the next general election, and therefore we're realistic about what we're able to achieve, but we will change Britain for the better.
Picture this: a rising political star known for her straight-talking approach suddenly finds herself at the center of an international incident. That's exactly where Angela Rayner stands after her recent comments about Donald Trump on live TV. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now, back to the video. As we take you through the dramatic sequence of events, you'll feel like you're right there in the studio, watching as Rayner's words spark a political inferno. From the initial shock to the frantic damage control, this is a story of ambition, missteps, and the high stakes of modern politics.
And Donald Trump is killing, thousands of Americans by giving them duff advice, and his macho, I'm all right, look at me, I've survived COVID, is an absolute buffoon. He has no place in the White House. He's an embarrassment, and he should be ashamed of himself.
So an equal prize. I don't think many people disagree with you. The question of this testing fiasco, we were promised a world-class testing system. The one thing is world-class at is going wrong.
COVID is a serious disease, it's a serious pandemic. People have died, loved ones have died, and he's an absolute disgrace. And so is Boris Johnson for not being able to even know his own rules. I think they're both idiots.
Angela Rayner's appearance on that political talk show was meant to be a routine affair. Another chance for Labour's rising star to showcase her straight-talking charm and outline the party's vision for Britain. But as we've seen time and time again in politics, it's the unexpected moments that can make or break a career. The interview started smoothly enough. Rayner, exuding confidence, fielded questions about Labour's domestic policies with her trademark candor. But then came the curveball. The host, sensing an opportunity for drama, brought up Donald Trump's recent election victory. And that's when things took a turn. Rayner's face visibly changed. Gone was the composed politician, replaced by a woman clearly struggling to contain her disdain. What followed was a tirade that left even seasoned political observers slack-jawed. Rayner didn't just disagree with Trump's policies, she went for the jugular. Donald Trump is an absolute buffoon, Rayner declared, her voice dripping with contempt. But she didn't stop there. She continued, stating that Trump has no place in the White House and is an embarrassment.
We'll know somebody at the moment who is trapped either in rented accommodation or they're in, substandard accommodation or they're in temporary accommodation because we don't have the social housing we need in this country.
Well, yes, you say you want decent homes for everybody, but you're the one that decided that Labour Lords should vote against the government's nutrient neutrality plans, which they claim would have seen 100,000 new homes built.
To get round the table to make that happen, we put an amendment down which could have delivered on the programme. The government weren't listening. We don't believe that you have to wreck our environment to deliver the homes. We can do both of those things.
The studio fell silent, the tension palpable as Rayner's words hung in the air. Now, let's be clear. Criticizing Trump isn't exactly a novel concept in British politics, but there's a difference between measured disagreement and the kind of personal attack Rayner launched. As her comments escalated, you could almost hear the collective intake of breath from Labour Party officials watching from afar. But Rayner, caught up in the moment, seemed oblivious to the potential fallout. She even went so far as to express uncertainty about who was worse, Trump or Boris Johnson. It was a moment of brutal honesty, sure, but one that raised serious questions about her judgment and, more worryingly, her confidence in her own party's leadership. As the interview progressed, the atmosphere in the studio became increasingly tense. Rayner's remarks grew more inflammatory, and you could see the dawning realization on her face that she might have gone too far. But by then, then the damage was done. The moment the interview ended, social media exploded. Clips of Rayner's comments spread like wildfire, accompanied by a tidal wave of reactions. Some viewers applauded her directness, praising her for saying what many were thinking, but others? They saw a politician who had let her emotions get the better of her, potentially jeopardizing Labor's carefully cultivated image. Political commentators were quick to weigh in, and their verdict was far from kind. While acknowledging that Rayner's comments might resonate with some voters, many raised concerns about her preparedness and understanding of Labor's policies. They pointed out that this wasn't Rayner's first gaffe, and questioned whether she was ready for the responsibilities of high office. But here's the real kicker. Labor currently enjoys a comfortable 20-point lead over the Conservatives in the polls. It's a lead they've worked hard to build, presenting themselves as a credible alternative to the current government. And with one impassioned rant, Rayner may have put that lead in jeopardy. The question now is how Keir Starmer and the rest of the Labor leadership will respond. Do they distance themselves from Rayner's comments, risking internal division, or do they stand by her, potentially alienating moderate voters and giving ammunition to their political opponent? As the dust settles on this political earthquake, one thing is clear: Angela Rayner's future in the Labour Party is far from certain. Her straight-talking style has long been seen as an asset, a refreshing change from the polished soundbites of many politicians. But this incident raises serious questions about her judgment and her ability to represent Labour on the world stage. Cutthroat world of British politics, careers can be made or broken in an instant. Rayner's comments about Trump may have scored her points with some voters, but at what cost? As Labour strategists scramble to contain the fallout, they're left wondering, was this the moment Angela Rayner's star began to fall? As the dust settles on Rayner's incendiary comments about Trump, a more troubling picture emerges. Her outburst wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment. It's part of a pattern that's been quietly simmering beneath the surface of Labour's carefully crafted image. The real shock: both her defenders and critics are missing the point. Rayner's Trump tirade exposes a fundamental tension within Labour, the struggle to balance authenticity with electability. And it's this tension that could unravel the party's lead in the polls. Let's face it, Rayner's always been a bit of a loose cannon. Her supporters love her for it, praising her straight-talking style as a breath of fresh air in the stale world of politics. But here's the thing: when you're gunning for number 10, every word matters, and Rayner's words have a habit of landing her in hot water. Take her recent fumble on Labour's housing policies. When confronted about the allocation of new homes to illegal immigrants, Rayner looked like a deer in headlights. It wasn't just that she disagreed with the policy, she seemed genuinely shocked it existed at all. This wasn't some minor detail, mind you. We're talking about a cornerstone of Labour's plan to tackle the housing crisis, and the Shadow Education Secretary couldn't even explain it. But wait, it gets worse. In another interview, Rayner was asked about class sizes. A pretty basic question for someone in her position, right? Instead of hard facts, we got a bunch of vague statements about significant numbers of children affected. No specifics, no data, just empty rhetoric. It's the kind of performance that makes you wonder, is she unprepared or just out of her depth? Now, we've all had our moments in the spotlight where we've tripped over our words, but for Rayner, it's becoming a habit. Time and again, she fumbles through interviews, struggling to provide clear, concise answers to straightforward questions. It's like watching a student trying to bluff their way through an exam they haven't studied for. The problem is, these aren't just harmless gaffes. Each misstep chips away at Rayner's credibility, and by extension, Labour's. The party's been riding high in the polls with a comfortable 20-point lead over the Conservatives, but politics is a fickle game, and that lead is starting to narrow. Why? Because voters are starting to ask some uncomfortable questions. If Labour can't even get its key figures to understand their own policies, how can they be trusted to run the country? It's a fair point, and one that's gaining traction as Rayner's public image continues to suffer. The Labour communications team is in full damage control mode, desperately trying to spin Rayner's Trump comments as a moment of passionate honesty, but they're fighting a losing battle. The more they try to defend her, the more attention they draw to her past mistakes. It's like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. And let's not forget, this isn't happening in a vacuum. Labour's still haunted by the ghosts of 2019, when unclear messaging contributed to a crushing defeat. They've worked hard to rebuild their image, presenting themselves as a credible alternative to the current government. But Rayner's gaffes threaten to undo all that hard work, reminding voters of the party's past communication failures. So what's the real issue here? Is it Rayner's outspoken nature, her apparent lack of preparation, or is it something deeper? A fundamental disconnect between Labour's public image and its internal reality? The truth is, it's all of these things and more. Rayner's Trump comments aren't just about Trump or even about Rayner herself. They're a symptom of a larger problem within labor, the struggle to find a coherent voice that resonates with voters without sacrificing authenticity. On one hand, labor needs figures like Rayner, passionate, relatable politicians who can connect with voters on a personal level. But on the other hand, they need discipline, consistency, and a clear understanding of party policies. Finding the right balance is crucial, especially as the next general election looms on the horizon. As labor strategists scramble to contain the fallout from Rayner's latest gaffe, they're faced with a difficult decision. Do they rein her in, risking the loss of her authentic appeal? Or do they let her continue unchecked, potentially jeopardizing the party's carefully cultivated image of competence? The coming weeks will be critical for both Rayner and labor. Will this be the wake-up call they need to address their communication issues? Or will it mark the beginning of a slide in the polls that could cost them the next election? Angela Rayner's recent comments about Donald Trump have set off a political firestorm that could have far-reaching consequences for labor's electoral chances. It's not just about what she said, it's about what her words reveal about the state of British politics and the Labour Party itself. Let's face it, calling Trump an absolute buffoon might win Rayner some fans on social media, but it's hardly the kind of diplomatic language you'd expect from someone aspiring to high office. And that's the rub, isn't it? Rayner's straight-talking style has always been her selling point, but in the world of international politics, it could well be her Achilles heel. But here's the thing, Rayner's Trump tirade isn't happening in isolation. It's part of a pattern of gaffes and missteps that's starting to raise eyebrows even among labor supporters. Remember her fumble on housing policies? Or her vague answers about class sizes? These aren't just minor slip-ups, they're symptoms of a deeper problem. That the real issue here is the growing disconnect between labor's carefully crafted image and the reality of its key figures' performance. Rayner's comments have exposed a fault line in the party's strategy. On one side, you have the polished, media-trained image that labor's been cultivating. On the other, you have the raw, unfiltered Rayner, saying what she thinks without considering the consequences. And let's not kid ourselves, there will be consequences. Public trust in politicians is already at rock bottom, and incidents like this only serve to reinforce that cynicism. Voters are looking for competence and clarity, not sound bites and sensationalism. Rayner's outburst might play well with the base, but it's unlikely to win over the undecided voters Labor needs to secure victory. But it's not just about Rayner. Her comments have put Labor leader Keir Starmer in an impossible position. Does he stand by his deputy and risk alienating moderate voters? Or does he distance himself and potentially fracture the party? It's a lose-lose situation, and one that the Conservatives will be all too eager to exploit. The timing couldn't be worse for Labour. They've been riding high in the polls with a comfortable lead over the Tories. But politics is a fickle game, and leads can evaporate overnight. Just ask Neil Kinnock, who saw a 20-point lead vanish in the run-up to the 1992 election. History has a nasty habit of repeating itself in politics, and Labour would do well to heed those lessons. So what's next for Rayner and Labour? The coming weeks will be crucial. Will this be the wake-up call the party needs to tighten up its messaging and ensure its key figures are on the same page? Or will it mark the beginning of a slide in the polls that could cost them the next election? One thing's for sure, Rayner's political future hangs in the balance. Her straight-talking style has always been her greatest asset, but it could well prove to be her undoing. In the cutthroat world of British politics, careers can be made or broken in an instant. Rayner's may have just taken a serious hit. But let's zoom out for a moment. This isn't just about one politician's career or one party's electoral chances. It's about the state of political discourse in Britain in an era of soundbites and Twitter spats. Are we losing the ability to engage in nuanced diplomatic dialogue? Are we sacrificing substance for style, policy for personality? These are questions that go beyond party lines. They strike at the heart of what we expect from our political leaders. Do we want firebrands who speak their mind regardless of the consequences? Or do we need measured diplomatic voices who can navigate the complex world of international relations? As this story continues to unfold, it's worth keeping an eye on how it affects Labour's standing in the polls. Will voters see Rayner's comments as a refreshing burst of honesty in a world of political spin? Or will they view it as a worrying lapse in judgment from a potential future leader? Only time will tell. But one thing's certain, in the high-stakes game of British politics, every word counts. And Angela Rayner may have just learned that lesson the hard way.